The man froze in the middle of room 12. His shaking hands dropped the rusty motel key onto the floor. The TV had just turned on by itself, buzzing with static, but that wasn't the worst part. On the bed, where he had laid his backpack a moment ago, now sat a stranger. The figure was pale, drenched in water, and staring straight at him with hollow, black eyes. The man's heart pounded so hard he thought it would rip from his chest. He blinked, hoping it was a trick of his imagination. But when he opened his eyes, the figure was still there, only closer. The motel clerk had told him no one had stayed in room 12 for years. And yet, someone or something was waiting for him inside. The pale figure opened its mouth slowly, and instead of words, a gurgling sound came out, like water rushing down a drain. The man stumbled backward, his body pressed against the door. He reached for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The door had locked itself. Then, the pale figure whispered in a low, broken voice, "You shouldn't have taken my key." And in that second, the lights went out. The beginning of the story. Hours earlier, James Harper was just another traveler looking for a place to rest. He had been driving down an empty highway in Arizona when exhaustion forced him to stop. His GPS showed the closest option, Motel 6. The sign flickered in red and blue neon, buzzing loudly against the desert night. James parked his dusty car and stretched. The place looked nearly abandoned, only a single light glowing in the office window. Inside, the clerk barely looked up. He was an older man with tired eyes, flipping through a yellowed ledger instead of using a computer. "Room?" James asked, dropping a $50 bill on the counter. The clerk hesitated, his bony fingers tapping against the desk. Finally, he reached under the counter and pulled out a key, an actual metal key attached to a heavy brass tag that read 12. James raised an eyebrow. "You guys don't use cards here?" The clerk's voice was dry. "Not for that room. You'll want to lock the door tight." James forced a laugh, thinking it was just some old motel joke. He grabbed the key, slid it into his pocket, and made his way down the long, dim hallway. The air smelled like mold and something faintly metallic. As he walked, he noticed the doors were numbered unevenly. Room 9, then 10, then 11, but where 12 should have been, there was just a blank wall. He frowned. Maybe it was around the corner. After a minute, he found it at the farthest end, room 12. The door looked older than the others, wood instead of cheap metal, and scratched all over like someone had tried to claw their way out. The key turned stiffly in the lock, and the door creaked open. Inside, the room was dim, the smell stronger. A bed sat in the middle with stiff sheets, a broken lamp on the nightstand, and an old box TV that looked like it hadn't worked in years. James tossed his backpack on the bed and sighed. Perfect. Just one night. But as he turned to close the curtains, he noticed something odd. The brass tag on the key didn't just say 12. Scratched faintly into the back were the words, "Last guest, the lows before the storm." James tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. He told himself it was just an old room with a creepy vibe. He pulled out his phone to call his girlfriend, but the signal was gone. Not a single bar. Frustrated, he tossed the phone aside and laid down. The mattress was hard as stone, and he could hear the faint drip of water somewhere in the room, though he saw no faucet. Midnight came quickly. James dozed in and out, but a loud sound snapped him awake. It was the TV. The screen glowed, static hissing loudly. He reached for the remote, but it wasn't anywhere in sight. Then the dripping sound grew louder, much louder, until it sounded like water was pouring into the room. James sat up, alarmed. The floor beneath the bed was wet. A dark puddle spread outward, soaking the carpet. He grabbed his backpack, about to leave, when the temperature dropped sharply. His breath came out in fog. And then he heard it, a whisper, right behind him. "You took my key." Cliffhanger, end of chapter 1. James spun around. On the bed, sitting where his backpack had been just moments earlier, was the pale figure. Its hair hung wet, dripping onto the sheets, and its dark eyes locked onto him. James's mouth went dry. He scrambled for the door, but the handle refused to turn. He yanked harder, his knuckles white, but the lock wouldn't give. The figure tilted its head, water dripping onto the floor. The whisper came again, louder this time. "You're the last guest." The lights flickered once. Then everything went black. James's breath came in short bursts as he pressed his back against the door. The room was drowned in blackness, but the sound of dripping water was everywhere, echoing from the walls, the ceiling, the floor, as if the whole motel were sinking into a flooded basement. Then, a cold hand brushed against his arm. James yelped and dropped to the floor, crawling toward where he remembered the lamp had been. His fingers fumbled over the nightstand until they found the lamp's cord. He pulled hard, yanking it free, and used the metal base like a weapon. "Stay back," he shouted into the darkness. But there was no reply. Just that same gurgling, bubbling sound like someone choking underwater. The air thickened with the smell of wet earth, and James realized something horrifying. The puddle beneath the bed was spreading, reaching across the carpet, seeping into his shoes. And then came the voice again, louder this time. "You're the last guest." Hashtag the terrifying middle. The emergency lights flickered on in the hallway outside, a faint red glow slipping under the door. For a moment, James thought it was his chance. He bolted to the door, slammed the lock, and twisted as hard as he could. But instead of opening, the handle turned hot, scalding hot, as if the metal had just been pulled from a fire. He screamed, yanking his hand back. Blisters rose instantly on his skin. The gurgling sound grew into a roar. James turned to see the figure rising from the bed. She, because now he could see it was a woman, dripped water with every step. Her soaked dress clung to her, her hair hung in long strands, and her eyes glowed faint white in the red light. James stumbled backward until he hit the wall. He raised the lamp base, but the woman didn't flinch. Instead, she spoke again, each word bubbling with water. They all checked in, but they never checked out. Hashtag the discovery. Panicking, James threw the lamp. It smashed into the figure's head, but instead of falling, she burst like water splashing from a bucket. The spray hit James in the face, cold and foul. He wiped his eyes, gasping, but when he looked again, the room was empty. The puddle was gone. The bed was dry. The TV sat silent and black. For a moment, James thought he had lost his mind. Maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks. He sank onto the bed, shaking. Then he felt it, something hard beneath the mattress. He pulled the sheets aside, lifted the edge of the mattress, and froze. Lying there was another brass key, identical to his. Only this one didn't say 12. It said 13, and scratched faintly into the back were the words, "Still here." Hashtag the ending. The hallway lights outside flickered again. James grabbed his backpack and the new key, desperate to escape. He flung the door open and ran, but the corridors stretched on endlessly, the numbers on the doors blurring as he passed. Room 9, Room 10, Room 11, and then Room 12 again. His stomach dropped. No matter how far he ran, he was trapped in the same hallway, the same circle. Behind him, the gurgling voice rose into a scream. The woman's figure appeared again, this time dragging herself along the wet carpet, her long arms reaching for him. James shoved the new key into the nearest door. The lock clicked. He threw himself inside, slamming the door shut. The room was pitch black. His hands searched the wall for a switch, but the light never came. Instead, a whisper rose from the dark. "Welcome to Room 13." And the door locked itself. The last sound James ever heard was the jingling of brass keys falling one by one to the floor, as if countless guests before him had tried and failed to escape. The end. It was past midnight when James Harper checked into Motel 6, somewhere off a lonely Arizona highway. The neon sign flickered, buzzing like it was ready to die. Inside, the old clerk barely looked at him before sliding over a brass key. Not a card, a key. Heavy, scratched, with one word on the back, * last guest. *. James laughed it off and headed to Room 12. The door was old wood, claw marks scratched deep into it. Inside, the smell of mold filled the air. A broken lamp, stiff sheets, and a TV that looked too ancient to even work. He dropped his bag and locked the door. But just after midnight, things changed. The TV flicked on by itself, blasting static. A puddle of water spread from under the bed, soaking into the carpet. Then James heard it, whispers, right behind him. "You took my key." He spun around. On the bed sat a pale woman, dripping wet, eyes black as night. She rose slowly, water spilling from her hair, her soaked dress clinging to her skin. Her voice gurgled like she was speaking from underwater. They all checked in, but they never checked out. James ran for the door, but the handle was burning hot, branding his palm. He turned back. The woman was gone. The puddle was gone. But under the mattress, James found another brass key. This one read 13. Scratched into the back were the words, * still here. *. Panicked, James bolted down the hallway. But no matter how far he ran, the doors repeated. Room 9, 10, 11, and always back to room 12. Behind him, the gurgling scream grew louder. The woman crawled across the floor, dragging herself closer. Desperate, James shoved the new key into a door. It clicked. He threw himself inside. Darkness swallowed him whole. And then came the whisper. "Welcome to room 13." The door locked, and James was never seen again. The last guest,